right, it is 4:30, and we will begin the curriculum committee meeting of the West Bend School District and School Board. We'll start with introductions. My name is Melanie Ergat, I'm school board member.
June Kruger, school board member.
Kelly Lang, school board member.
Tim Harder, director of technology.
Jill Reese, director of curriculum instruction.
Jen Wimmer, superintendent.
All right, so we will begin our agenda with the at-risk report, and it will be presented by Jill Corbett.
Hello. So yes, I'm Jill Corbett and I work in student services, and just making sure all of you should have gotten this. Okay. So we're going to reference some of this in the PowerPoint today, but like a lot of this is just so that you understand our legal requirements as a school district and what we have to do and kind of what direction as a district we're looking at. So the first part that we're showing you today is just kind of talking about some of the requirements for at-risk programming. Like when we sit down to really look at our targets and what we want to do, making sure that we're not only in the DPI compliance, but that we're serving students pre-K through 12. This are some of the areas that we're looking for, making sure that we have someone that's responsible for the development, making sure we're looking at work-based learning experiences, program and activities, ensuring that our programs are bringing curriculum modifications and that they're aligning to always to graduation requirements, including notification regarding at-risk students. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit later, but making sure that families know what that means and what's the response going to be, not that they just are. Adequate access to programming for eligible students. Again, making sure you have multiple pathways or options for students is what we always kind of strive to do, making sure that there's not a one size fits all model. And then finally, just ensuring that our special education and related services are aligned and provided for eligible students. So this is kind of like we always say, when we look at really what our big goals are, we want to improve on as a district, and why we have multitude systems of support. These are some of the areas that we highlight every year as, for us, things we're looking for. We, of course, we want to increase graduation rates, right? We want to make sure the kids have a successful path through the high school, through K-12 actually, to get to graduation. We also want to increase that sense of belonging. We know when we survey kids about if they feel they belong to an environment or they feel connected, attendance rates improve, academics improve, test scores improve. So that's always one of our big key areas. Reduce academic failure and dropouts. Obviously, again, kind of connecting back to graduation rates, right? Trying to find success for students and making sure that they feel they're meeting their goals. Provide targeted proactive interventions to students identified as being at risk. Again, not having a one size fits all, trying to find what is the need of each student. And last, involving the parents, guardians, and community agencies in the development of individual student plans. We know it takes a village, and so some of the things, just making sure that we're bringing the right partners to the table. When we talk about students who are at risk, this is kind of the state statute of who is and how are we identifying students at risk. So really looking at grades 5th through 12th grade, and they usually are typically 1 or more years behind their age group in number of credits attained. So a lot of times we have a specific, like at this place you would be considered credit deficient. So that would be the word we would use, they would be credit deficient. 2 or more years behind their age group in basic skill levels. Sometimes it might be habitual truancy. At times, school-age parents would put you, if you're a parent already. We know that that's a harder avenue to have. Adjudicated delinquents, or that you are in sometimes the system already receiving services and are struggling in the community. And then looking at our 8th grade scores and making sure that are they below a basic level? Are they falling below significantly below their peers. So we look at all these areas when we are trying to identify if a student is at risk. And the reason we do it is not just to put a label on a student. The reason we do it is we know there's something that we need to step in and probably do to help make sure that they're not a dropout or someone who gives up on themselves. This is just a visual I just want to put in here. We always talk about, you know, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 1 being really that universal for all. You know, what do all students in the schools should be expecting to have? You know, obviously that high quality curriculum, getting whole group, small group, differentiated instruction inside the classroom. This is, you know, really through your main teacher. Interventions at times might happen and monitoring progress. When you step into the tier 2 and tier 3, this is more the specific targeted groups. So you can see that the services get a little more targeted, right? You know, you might have specific interventions when we talk about math or reading intervention. You're going to have more possible plans and group of teachers or teams monitoring those plans to make sure the student is making progress and just making sure that the interventions, accommodations, and modifications are being met. When we get to tier 3, this is for our highest need intense students that we are concerned about not meeting goals, right? So this is where we get more individualized plans. We really want to closely monitor. We're collaborating much more often as teams and checking the data. And finally, we're maybe looking at alternative at-risk programming options. So for me, I'm going to have you go to the next slide. We're going to talk about some of those at-risk options, but just that you understand, like, if a student would be identified as a student at risk, this is kind of the path of some of the things that we would do for families. We would make sure a written notice is sent home by the school team determining what are those students' needs. The team would meet with the family, sometimes it's a counselor, principal, teacher, whoever is going to be part of that team. And then we would work together to collaborate and make an alternative plan. At times, we look at alternative options access. So obviously, depending on what grade you're in, those change a little bit. Yeah.
You know, one thing is it okay if I just
Yeah.
jump in? And I'm going to kind of backtrack. I think one of the things that's most important to recognize in this structure is Jill's going to talk about some of our alternative options, but what this is really intended to show is that we're working to prevent having to get to that point where we're looking at an alternate option. And you can see in the arrows that go alongside of the pyramid, the whole time we're doing this, you have a team of educators who are working together to put plans in place, and you're working with the parent. So this isn't just school doing our thing and hoping it gets better. This is like, we're a collaborative team with parent and guardian, and we're really trying to prevent having to get to the point where we're really making an at-risk identification and looking at different pathways. So, but at times, we do determine that that's the best next step to ensure graduation. So you're going to talk about some different services.
Yeah, so and we'll talk about some specific ones in a minute, but when we look at individualized services, I mean, this is not like where this is all we can do, but we kind of look at what do we have available, what, you know, could fit the need of a student, especially just, you know, depending on what's going on. We have off-site tutoring options, both in the community and our home base. We also have some off-site tutoring in our building here. We have district office individualized tutoring, district office small group tutoring, online classes, work-based experiences on school grounds. We have work-based experiences in the community, and even community recreational supports. I mean, so we really are looking at, again, where is the breakdown and where can we come in and help and make sure that they are given that educational experience.
And I think it's important to know we're showing you a list, but this is not all inclusive. And Jill won't say this on behalf of herself, but she's pretty creative about looking at kids' needs and saying, okay, what's getting in the way? why is this kiddo struggling, and what are we gonna create if it doesn't already exist? And I just wanna give one example, because we had a couple situations this year where we were looking at students who had great work skills, but were struggling with the academics. And Jill does a really nice job of going out into the community and saying, okay, can we help structure a job and put some supports in place and build some competency in terms of workplace learning and work towards credit. And this year, actually, our technology department sat down with us and said, okay, what if we don't have a place out in the community for this student, but how about we do like a youth apprenticeship or a mentorship right here in our department? So we've been able to see some really supported success with kids working in one of our departments and learning job skills they never probably even considered as something that they could tackle. So I just want to say that, I mean, Jill goes above and beyond to really think about, you know, where is this student struggling? How can I align or create an experience that doesn't exist that gets them moving back onto the right path? And I've been really proud of the fact that it isn't just the student services department wrapping around kids, our technology department, our facilities department, our human resources. We've had kids kind of doing little odd tasks and jobs there. So it really becomes, you know, a team effort, finding the best in kids.
So a couple different areas. I am going to go through and highlight a couple areas of at-risk programming that we do. Just one, kind of proud of it. Two, I do think you should know what we have available and why we use it. And I think kind of piggyback what Emily was saying, every kid that comes to us has a story, and we know that, and that's always kind of where we start. And we always kind of start, like, also for me, it's turning around the I can't do school and why I don't want to do school, and trying to get them to realize they can and what is really their dream, and try to how do we bridge that. So first thing we have, and we use it very sparingly, but it is sometimes, it does serve a purpose. We can always send kids over to Marine Park for their HSED. That is our last option we want to do, because we know we're not then going the path of a typical diploma, them being a state diploma, not a Westminster School District diploma. But there are certain kids that, for whatever reason, again, every kid has a story, the on-grounds of anything just isn't going to work, and they need a complete fresh start. And so we do have that as an option for kids. This year we had a total of 6 kids who went through that program with a 100% graduation rate. And I will tell you, all 6 of those kids, if we would have made them stay on grounds, if we would have forced the hand, they would have probably dropped. So to me, I am happy to say they left with a state diploma, and they are going to be moving on to their next adventure. And the one nice thing is, Marine Park and ourselves have a pretty nice collaboration of, we don't just do it to get the diploma, we also, they work on a lot of career planning. So that's always kind of nice, is there's some connection over there for them. One of the other programs we have is called we call it PACE. It stands for Personalized Academic Credit Education. And we have on-site and off-site PACE. Okay? And kind of the thought behind PACE is typically students who are struggling with the traditional type classroom, or the traditional type, possibly the amount of transitions kids have to go through, the bells ringing every 48 minutes, the hallways, all that. Sometimes these are used for kids that may be coming back from residential or hospitalization, or just struggle again with some social emotional. There are also some kids that struggle with just some academic and need to just focus. We tend to use more computer-based, but we have staff that are there to help them or determine if they're not fit for the computer-based learning, that we try something else. We had 59 students go through this, 28 the first semester and 31 the second semester. And typically these are not our 12th graders, these are kids that are 9th through 11th grade. And what we're trying to do is, a lot of the kids, we're even just trying to keep on grounds. We're trying to get them out of their homes, get into school, and feel comfort and make a connection to someone. We're very lucky with the people who do run those programs, because that's kind of their first priority, is to help the student create a connection to the school.
And when Jill uses the term on-site and off-site, what she is referring to is the fact that we have a program running at our high school on that campus, and then we also serve kids here. And some of that, you know, lots of different reasons we make that decision, but we've talked in different meetings about the fact that we do have kids who are struggling with you know, anxiety or depression, and they're struggling to be present or feel comfortable yet to go into that large environment. And sometimes we have really good success if we can come to a smaller environment, build that sense of confidence, and then always working back towards, but we want you with your peers at school. But we want the opportunity or the option to make different decisions when necessary.
Two of our other programs that we utilize is, yeah, thank you. GPS, which I'm sure you guys have heard before, that's more of our work-based program that we use. Right now, kids would go to that program if they are, you know, we say kind of trying to find that technical career is really what we are targeting our students that are going into 11th grade. It's a 2-year program. A lot of time this prepares them to have some of that early exposure and be able to learn on the job. There is a classroom component, but the classroom components are actually built into the businesses where they kind of work together, and they still do math, science, social studies, English, your same amount of credits that all kids have to do in those areas, but they're a little more focused on for the technical world. So again, it's kind of using what I learned in the next couple hours. This really does help the students that are hands-on learners that really want to go and learn right in the business and just dwell right into it. We had 12 seniors this year and 8 juniors participate in this program. 10 of those students of the 12 graduated. 1 ended up leaving and doing something different. And 1 is going to finish next year. He came in late. It's a 2-year program. Some can finish in a 1.5 years, and he will finish that semester next year. So our graduation rate for the students was 83.3%, but kind of bigger on top of that. I was given some information from the GPS team. They do what's called they kind of celebrate what's the next step. So again, it's not you're just done, it's June 10th, get out of here. We celebrate what is next. And of our 10 students, we have 3 of them are going on to the military, and we had a couple that they call signing day, which means the businesses that they've been interning at actually took them in and want to have them full time. And the cool thing about that, one was welding, one is an auto tech that's looking at small engine. They're more than likely the businesses are going to take them and put them onto more post-secondary trainings or education. So kind of not stopping where they're at, they're going to keep growing them as they see the potential. 2 of our students actually, ironically, after going through this program and building up some confidence and skills, actually worked all year for background and started their own power washing business. So, I mean, cool, they're entrepreneurs, they kind of watch how businesses work and how to go from the ground up. So, I mean, I think that I always like to say this part, and I'm going to do for a couple other things, because one of the things is, again, we're not just trying to get the diploma. We want kids to be able to leave and have what they really functionally want to do and be proud of themselves. Our personalized offsite tutoring actually is here in this building at district office, and this is for students specifically with special education needs who struggle at the high school. Again, this really usually is our kids at just that traditional classroom and how it just doesn't match their need. Again, it might be some mental health issues. It may be that they're coming back from a more exclusive environment and we want to slowly reintegrate them in and make sure that they find success and get the supports they need. We had 12 students go through the program, 9th through 12th grade, and our 2 seniors this year did graduate. So we're really proud of them because they stayed on track. And I didn't put it in here, but of those 12 students, I think 11 of them are all connected some way to the high school. So they're still taking some classes. We are doing a slow transition. That's the one thing. We don't want to be, off-site and never come back. We want them to have some of those traditional opportunities. We also have up at the high school, it's called individualized credit recovery. So this is for students who might have maybe failed a class, are struggling in a certain area, and we want to get them back on track so that they're not credit deficient. Just really recognizing that, especially our freshmen, sometimes the transition's a little tougher than we thought until we really get to know them. There are times we have to do some credit recovery. We had 160 students enrolled, and this does not mean they just sit in enrollment there. That means they come in, they work on the skill they might have missed, and then they finish up or test out of it, and they're done. So we were able to recoup 423 credits this way this year. That's 423 half credits. So, but I mean, it's doing the purpose, and again, trying to get them to recognize you might have not been successful the first time around, but you were able to learn the skill, get back on track, and you're back in the classrooms. We also have what's called Literacy Principles class. Our Literacy Principles class is really just support students that are struggling with reading and really trying to increase that reading level. One, just to make it easier in the regular classroom, but also two, there is some alternative programs that you need a 9th grade reading level to be eligible for. So just trying to get them up to having options, just broadening. But again, for me, the higher the reading level, the better I know you're gonna be in classes, the more you're gonna comprehend all that. We had 25 students enrolled this year, 7 the first semester. Oh, I had some wrong in my math there, I'll fix that. I don't know how that, I don't know why that is. But we were able to really look at moving a lot of students to another program, hopefully, that will help them successfully complete graduation. But I think the bigger piece of this is, again, we were able to see every student made progress. It may not have been the expected progress to fill the gap, but we did make progress in reading and what we were hoping for. One of our biggest senior programs, this is for students that are just 12th grade, is our GETO Option 2 program. And this is an alternative path to graduation. We have had GETO 2 now for, I want to say, maybe 18 years. It's been going for a while. We have kind of ebbed and flowed on what we feel is most purposeful for students, but the biggest thing is these are for the 12th graders that are credit deficient. And you have to have a 9th grade reading level to be able to get into this program. The bigger piece of this though is we want you to show competency in the math, reading, science, and social studies, but we also want you to be a successful community member. We want you to be functionally leave here and have a plan and a goal. And so we work really hard to provide opportunities to students. Classes such as personal finance, personal development, character education. All students do a portfolio, and in the portfolio they do a lot of deep diving on their personal interests, some exploratory on career options, exploratory on post-school options. They take testing to see how they learn, what is their biggest strength, what are the areas that they need to be aware of. But it really is a self-reflection for them and something they take along with them. So this year, we had 35 students in the program, and we had 33, I'm sorry, that's wrong there, 33 that graduated. So we had a 94.2% graduation rate. The last 3 years, we have very successfully been in the 92 or higher percent in this program. But I am going to say one of the biggest things I'm proud of is we talked last year, and I think Melanie, you were probably the only one here last year, but we had 53 students in the program last year. Why I think that's important is that we have less kids coming up that are credit deficient in that area. And to me, that was our big goal. We knew we had this kind of loop of COVID, and we saw our numbers kind of increase, and we're like, we gotta work really hard to decrease these numbers. We also never want our seniors to get to the point where they feel hopeless by senior year, so this was one of the big things of, like, I love that our numbers had gone down substantially from last year, but our graduation rates remained just as high. And I will tell you, the two that did not finish up came to the program late. You don't have to all start in September. They came late, and they will graduate in the fall of next year. They both are coming back and going to finish off. So it's just a matter of when they started. Again, I said this before, but this is kind of a passion area for me. Of the students that were in our program, this is kind of some of the data of like where their path is when they presented their portfolio, which kind of gives us like what they want to do next and what they got out of the program. We have 3 that are going to go on to job training programs. They're like in an apprenticeship or internships. We had 10 of our 35 that are going to go vocational or technical college. We had 4 that are signed up and heading to 4-year college, 2 that were going to the military, and 16 that were going into continuing employment or full-time. And the reason I show you this is to basically, we don't want, just because you go into an alternative program, that you can't have the same options as your peers. As you can see, the options are still very much open. And we bring in a lot of like speakers and community people to help try to really encourage kids to look outside what they traditionally thought was for them. And I will say, as they start finishing up the program, here are some kids that didn't think they were going to graduate on time with their peers. The hope that they feel and the, I can do this, it all of a sudden opens so many more conversations for them, and they want doors to be opened. So I'm happy to say it was nice to see some of our students listen to us and are going on to some really cool options. Through this school year and doing some of the at-risk stuff, I just wanted to kind of look at like what has I feel our district team really learned through all this. Anyone that is able to come to one of our GETO 2 graduations, I think the big theme we hear over and over from students is just how much more confident and successful they feel. And again, they went through many years of feeling they were credit deficient, or possibly, again, they all have a story, right? Possibly had a year or 2 that were really rough, something happened outside of school, or maybe they had a medical issue, or well, anything. And they kind of came back and they ended on a high note with their peers. And it's almost like a fresh start. So one of the things is that we know if we can get them into programs that have that light at the end, we know we can usually get them in and engage them better. The next thing that we really learned is that the alternative programs did not stop students from having the same post-secondary options as their peers. And what I mean by that is the slide that I showed you last, which is keeping those doors open, that it's not like I'm just trying to get you to graduation. I want you to see what else is out there. I want you to go for your goal. We know, sadly, that we still are having some students that are dropping out senior year, right? So that is kind of the one big thing I took away going, okay, why is that happening? What is our, where's the pulse on that? And one of the things that our high school team continuously kind of looks at is a lot of times as the students that continue to be credit deficient, but on top of that, possibly not meeting that 9th grade reading level so that there isn't an alternative program that is there for them. So that's going to lead me into the next thing. I just want to, we know that,
That's fine.
That's okay. So in saying that, I've spent some time this year really talking to my team and really looking at how do we create the same experience as our GETO 2, which is getting our results, helping students not only create the academics and competencies, but really being able to have a bigger picture and have some of those doors open. So we talked about what do we need to do as a school, and we want to move forward on starting the Forward program, which is a mimic of GETO 2. However, it's for students that don't hit that 9th grade reading level. We would still be doing exactly the same, so I'm going to have you click on that link. Just as a, so the big part of our program is the 4 categories. Our ELA, math, science, and social studies competencies. The state tells us we have to make sure that we are meeting competency. In the GETO 2 program, we tend to do it as either you meet credits or you take the GED test and you hit a score of 145 or higher. You prep to try to take that to show that you can meet competency in the area. For our Forward program, what we want to do is exact same thing. You can still hit it by the credits. There are still kids that will hit the credits necessary for graduation in a certain category. They can still try to do the prep and work with the teacher on getting the 145 or higher on the GED Ready test. Or we can do competencies where we work with finding out what standards are they lacking in, and we kind of work on those standards specifically and have like a mini assessment in each of those standards, okay? So still meeting competencies, but not sitting through, you're gonna go through chemistry again, all of chemistry. We're gonna look at what did we want you to leave here with, per the state. So again, doing the exact same thing, just adding one little additional area. And then if you look at towards the bottom of this document, this middle part where it starts with health and goes down to the final presentation itself, these are all the additional classes and areas that we have students work through during the GO2 program. If you look at this closely, it is a complete mirror image of each other because we want them to have those exact same opportunities. This was already board approved. This is what we want to continue with. We believe that it is important for them to have health, civics tests, employability, personal finance, character education, and that career-ready portfolio, which we know really helps students in that looking at that next step. In addition, all students, because they go to school for 3 hours a day, have to complete 10 hours a week at a minimum outside of school. That bottom designated list are all options that we give students to meet those 10 hours. The primary focus of the 10 hours is really to benefit them and help them to be better citizens in the future. So we try not to limit it only to work hours because not everyone needs that. Sometimes people need to work on themselves in different ways. So these again are just some of the areas that we have worked with students on trying to have those options.
I think for me, one of the things that was most impactful as I was learning about this option is the intent isn't to like lower the bar for kids. It's to expand the venues in which they can demonstrate learning. And an example that I think really resonated with me was the idea of, I might have a student who's struggling to hit that 145 on the math GED assessment, but on their job as a welding apprentice, they're able to demonstrate their competency through measuring and design and whatever it is, and then we design the assessment based upon those work-based skills. Because the idea of limiting a student's opportunity to gain their regular high school diploma because there's one test that's holding them back when they've demonstrated this work-based skill set that aligns with our competencies, places them at a disadvantage when they leave us. Or if they become frustrated in that process and then they don't obtain that high school diploma, their path forward is impacted. So it isn't a lower bar, it's expanding the venues in which they can demonstrate their learning. What kind of learner are you, and how can you show us you've met these standards? And it might not be the GED test that does that for every student.
And we just want to make sure that, this is not our first path for students, right? Our first path is traditional classroom credits, having all the experiences. But as we've learned, it just doesn't meet everyone's needs. So, again, we are seeing so much success on some areas, but that 9th grade reading level was a barrier. And as I sat back this year, I'm like, we cannot continue to have that as the main barrier. So I welcome any questions at this time.
No, that's a ton.
Yeah, I know.
And it probably just touches the surface of.
Or if something I said didn't make sense.
No, I think that's awesome. I love that those tests aren't going to hold someone back, and you hold someone back, they're going to just shut down. So something that has more offerings, I think is such a great idea. I'm just wondering, how often do you evaluate kids to get into one of these programs?
Sure, I can answer that. So we do not start the evaluation process until, honestly, it's about 4th quarter, 11th grade. Because For the senior-based programs, is that what you're asking?
I would just
for annual?
overall, yeah,
Okay.
overall.
The senior-based programs is usually fourth quarter, and at that point, we have a really good pulse on if they're gonna, even at the end of that semester, be credit deficient, if, you know, what we're looking. So we do have them come in and take a reading test, just so we can start the conversation. We also never stop the option. There has been students that say, I know I'm gonna need to go an extra semester or a year, but I really am willing to do that. I wanna have that traditional experience. That's fine. We never stop, you know, we just start the conversation. For some of the other programs, a lot of times the counselors are having those programs, and it's usually when they're starting to either see a kid falling or struggling in an area. Sometimes parents will say, can we just sit down? We're experiencing this, and this out in the community in our home, and we really need to have some options. What else can meet my child's needs? So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. Our MTSS team meets to start looking at some students that are struggling in these areas. I believe it's every other week. And so a lot of times these students are kind of already on our radar as struggling, and sometimes it's attendance or classes, discipline. Sometimes counselors will bring up a student they're concerned about just because they were having a conversation with a family that there's a lot going on. So it's kind of a case by case, except for our senior one.
Well, and that process of reviewing data and being responsive to data happens, I mean, that happens as you go into 4K and 5K. Those cycles are happening regularly throughout the year where we're identifying, is this a student who needs targeted supports, more intensive supports? That's how we consider whether or not a special education evaluation has to happen. So that happens really authentically throughout the school year for every student, but then there are times where these other factors are triggering a closer look for a much more intensive program. And to be very honest, sometimes it happens really quickly. And I don't want to align at-risk programming with behavior, but there are times where all of a sudden something happens in the life of a child that takes them from, I was in the regular classroom, to we have to make a different decision on your behalf, and we don't want you to become a student who doesn't successfully graduate. So how do we respond quickly and look at what options do we have and how do we individualize it? Because right now, learning in the regular environment isn't going to be a match for you. So it can happen slowly over time or really quickly in response to behavior, a change in a medical situation, mental health, all sorts of things that can make us move really quickly through that process.
I just want to say, I think sounds like a really great program, and I love that there's so many different creative options for people, that there's so many different people out there, you know, and I love that kids aren't slipping through the cracks, you know, and kind of getting left behind, and that you're very proactive about that. So I appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Jill, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So the Forward program, did you say that's been passed through board approval?
No, we
Or
determined that
did
we
you mean
really,
GEDO too?
GEDO2 has
GEDO
it.
too, okay.
And it's just, so we're not changing anything except for there's just a different area to show competency. So we're not changing
Okay.
anything. The only thing we know is because the students in there don't meet the 9th grade reading level, we just had to change how we meet competency, and that's it. Everything else stays the same, status quo. It is going to be at the high school so that we can plug in and utilize other natural supports like our EL, special ed staff, things like that for students. That way we're making sure that we're meeting all their needs.
And I think one of the things with that, sorry Jill, is we're calling it Forward because to call it GEDO2 504, you know,
Right.
using
Yeah.
all,
Yeah.
it's
can have a branding,
basically
yeah.
a venue. It's
Yeah.
basically falls within that GEDO2 umbrella, but it's a different way of showing competency. But for the people making those decisions, it's easier to say, okay, it's an offshoot of GEDO and we're gonna call it this, but ultimately it's the same criteria using a competency-based structure as an option. Does that make sense?
It does. I just wonder for the committee purposes, if there's a reason to bring it forward to the board for approval, just to then kind of recertify that it's the right thing to do and to make sure, you know, the kids are getting the credits and all those pieces. I'm not saying I have the answer to that. I guess I'm asking this committee if that's something.
And that's certainly a part of, I mean, that feedback, because our intention, Jill is planning to come back in July to the full board and for discussion at that point. And if that is something that we want to look at from the perspective of taking action, because that's expanding the option, we can certainly path to do that. So I appreciate that, Jill.
Yeah, I'd like to know then what the committee thinks of that and if that's the path you guys would like to take for that.
And if that's something that typically would come before the board for approval, I'm okay with that. I guess I don't see any harm in approving it.
I think that would be largely procedural.
Yeah.
It's already approved, there's no elemental shifts and everything, like I said, it's rebranding, but it's a point of celebration too,
Mhm.
that can be highlighted in your report.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
guys.
Thank you so much.
Jill, thank you for all your work. It's really appreciated and it really gets a lot of our students over the graduation line and in a good path. It's awesome.
I said that's why, for anyone who got to see the part of the Grand Walk, it was like, it's my favorite day.
Yeah, and it is, if there's ever an opportunity to come into one of the portfolio presentations, that's kind of, our students who participate in GITO, that's kind of their celebration or graduation. And I think my favorite, so after they present their portfolio, all of the participants have the opportunity to ask them a question. And I think my favorite response from a student this year was, one of the teachers who works here said, well, was there anything we could have done differently for you? And he said to the group, the student said, no, I think you did way more than you needed to do. And it was just, you know, also not just the I mean, we've got some pretty amazing people down here, many who are retired educators who continue to come back and build these really deep connections with kids that give them hope. You know, when maybe that was kind of the missing piece when they were working through a traditional pathway. So I just thought that was a pretty cool testament to, and I think he might have actually said, no, dude, you did more than you needed to. So it was pretty cool. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
I am afraid I'm gonna mess this up here. Do I come back to here, Tim? Or,
You don't need to, we're not using that.
okay,
You're
all
okay.
right, all right, so I can just close this right like.
Next on the agenda, we are going back into discussion on the policies in the 300 series. And that will be presented by Jen Wimmer.
All right, don't move your packets. We're gonna walk through them. They're in very explicit
Thank you.
order. So as you know, we've been engaged in conversation around material selection, all the policies associated with that, with our work around those pieces. Which is this? Oh, is that yours?
I think it's, Jill handed me that earlier.
Oh.
Maybe it was part of her packet, because there's like
There's multiple sets in
Multiple
here.
packets.
All right. If you're following along at home, we've got all the policies linked in their current format. So you can see them. All of our policies are right on our website. They're linked there so you can see. But we wanted to unpack specific policies. In your packet, in the buff color, are kind of our original language and sitting there. So the first paperclip packet are policy 330. It's standards aligned, goal-based curriculum development. So in our conversations, we've had conversations with your committee, through policy committee, and with the full board to kind of get us towards where we want to be on these. So when you take 330 and unpack it a little bit, the very first section is around standards. And we talked last time around making this have a very clear title around curriculum development and improvement. So right behind it, you see some draft language around 313. 313 would be the appropriate number to speak to academic standards. So I took and highlighted a little bit in green You can see our current language. I also included it on the bottom so you could see that. I've included our current language from that 330 around standards specifically. And then I also fleshed it out using additional language, making clarity of what the responsibility is, that it's all board approved at that standard level, and what those expectations are, so that we could separate out the standards, and then the next policy will focus just solely on the curriculum improvement work. So I'll give you time to take a look at that again, kind of the opener and closing of that first paragraph, current language that we use, and then the other pieces that were there, and I included it in parentheses, on that second page. That's all of our current language. I included that first sentence above specifically, the board adoption piece included it specifically, and then the next two sentences talk about annual notification, as well as placing that on the agenda. Both of those concepts are included above, and so all those components were in there. So again, that's a board responsibility to approve those, and then it's our responsibility to make sure that we communicate those to families.
So did you say the main thing you're doing this, you're just separating these into two different policies?
So I pulled out the academic standards and then just expanded on that to include more understanding around what that is and the board's role in approving those, and that accountability piece for us to inform families, community of what standards we're using and how that would be noticed. And that is statute driven as well. So, and again, nothing that you have to, we're a committee working through things, so it takes some time to process, but that's the intention, so that we could isolate those other pieces and get at clarity for community who picks up policy and reads it on that. So again, just using all of our current language and concepts, just maybe a little bit more depth.
Okay.
Anyone have any questions about this? Again, outside of committee, if you think of something, these will go back through policy too after they clear you as well. Okay. The next piece of that 330, again, referencing our original, which is in buff color. The next piece was around the continuous improvement, curriculum development. In our conversation, we wanted to more kind of succinctly outline that this is really curriculum development and improvement. So right behind that, and again, that first little paper clip text, you have, and it'll show up as 330 language for consideration on the board docs. Look right in there, and there's a couple of sentiments that are the same, just some exact language, but it really deconstructed what the intent is, what our major objectives are, our obligations, how we would engage a broader community. That's point number 2. That's something we've been very committed to, is how our community gets to engage in those pieces. So if you want to take some time and look at those, that format, and then again, I did them like this so you could kind of look side by side. So if there's certain pieces you want to pull in and go for that, we can do that. This is a piece we've been working on across districts. We're not the only district talking about and wondering about this right now. I've been highly engaged with the Washington County superintendents on just how do we do this in a manner that's in keeping with, like you said, what our community is seeking, information, our families and our boards. So we'll stay continuously connected on that as well.
What would be like an example of how the board would encourage practices to seek to engage the broader community? Okay.
So we would put that out, and maybe you'd want that the administration is directed by the board instead, because you're right, they're actually coming more from us. So you would see our pieces where we put in our newsletters, we've made those accessible to the community, we'll put on our community news. If those pieces are under review, we make them available here for viewing. We push things to the library, all of those, how are we doing that? So to your point, we might want to say a little bit more around the administration, the board, believes the administration should do those things, because you're right, you guys aren't going around and doing that, we do that on the board's behalf.
Sure.
I can play with that wording.
Yeah, just.
Yep.
No, you're right.
Example.
You know.
Nope, you're right, but yeah, that's how we engage,
It's
but.
a lot of like words and
Yeah.
like, okay, what is the practical
Exactly.
definition of this?
Yep. Are you sure you don't want to be on policy? That's exactly
Yeah,
what we
no,
Nope.
Thanks for asking.
Right. I think this, the format of it and some of those, as you said, kind of these key steps, a little bit more succinctly lay out the accountability that we take on as a district in what we develop, what components are going to be a part of that, how that will come back to the board for annual review, and just lays that out a little bit
Sure.
cleaner.
Yeah, and I like the idea, which you probably know, but like having the opportunity for the community to review things before we would approve it, because it's helpful to have a lot of extra eyes and people to look through, because somebody might miss something, and that another person may catch.
Yeah, and this still gives, through that plan, this outline, all those steps and those pieces, but we know that plan that you review, we might have to come to you to change that. Tim, I think, spoke last time around some of the pieces with technical credits and, sometimes course names change, those kinds of things. So we know and understand that cycle kind of can be fluid. We need to bring that back to the board and discuss the why, and all of those things still progress, not just the plan of it, but then any action around those things still come back to the board. We'll go through those pieces. So there's multiple pieces where it requires board action and authorization. Any other questions on this? Like I said, I'll share this with our team, and I know the board's been engaged and will solicit feedback through policy as well, but take some time, take some looks at it. Certainly out there for public view as well, and anyone has ideas, let us know, and I'll stay connected to those additional districts on that. And again, those are the really big umbrella ones. Okay. That next set of paper clips you should be looking at starts with 361. So everyone should be on that set. This was selection of resources. Our language was okay. We reviewed the language last time, but nestled inside of this is that reconsideration process. So we talked about making that more clear for people, and to do that we would change the title, selection of resources and reconsideration. This part of the language was fine. We would separate out, and I showed you how that form. Tim will make sure that we can post it so it's a fillable electronic form if that's what people choose, or they can simply write it, but it will follow as a separate standalone exhibit under both this policy and the library materials policy. So it gets doubly stated on the website and takes away the kind of looking through things. So even if they don't know where to look for the policy or the language, they might even just see that form itself. So there's that piece. Any questions about that overall policy language?
Well, this was kind of the one where I had discussed the overall appropriateness of the materials relative to the intended student audience.
Yep.
I guess I was looking for some more specific.
We're gonna get there. Yeah, we're gonna get there. So right behind that is the AR, it's the administrative rule. And this is something for the committee to talk about too. Sometimes things are nestled in policy or the AR that goes with it. So you might want some of these things to translate into the policy itself or stay in that. So the committee should think about kind of where they want it. do they want it in policy? So the next piece are the AR in buff. This is all of our current language. And then taking our form, all the content's the same, and just making it so it could stand as an exhibit in a separate form on the website. It'll show separately, but it is existing language. Okay? So you can lay those items side by side. Right behind it is in a white sheet, double-sided. And this is where we get into the deep kind of discussion that we wanted to. So right behind that 361 packet, you should have a one-pager back-to-back. So we talked about, again, resource selection. And we're going to have to go through and you need to question every single word and do you know what everything means and all of that. And would the community or general public know what that means, right? Because sometimes we might have an assumption about what that is. So press in as we go through. I'll go through it in small chunks, okay? So our primary instructional materials, because this policy deals with that selection of those resources. So any book that would be used for instruction with all students in the classroom would be considered primary resources, right? We talked about that I don't have a choice. I'm using it as a read aloud. I'm using it as an instructional material. Any of those books. Those are our primary resources. Jane's working on our website update, and all of those would actually be listed right in our curricular piece as well. So you'll see that. We'll try and get you kind of a page of what that'll look like so you can see it. So they'll be listed and out in advance for families, but that's what that is. Selection of primary resources should consider the appropriateness of the material based on both the developmental and chronological age of the child. What I did was I went through the AR and I said what we were going to do, right? And I took the bullets because it says in there we're going to look for appropriate, but we were like, who says what's appropriate? Who says what this means? So these are pieces we can push into here, we can push into policy, but that's what I went through and answered some of the very questions that we talked about. So in definitions, developmental age of the child represents intellectual, social, emotional, physical functioning of a child. So it might not align with a chronological age, right? We could have a student, for example, who's 12 years old, maybe functioning at a 5-year-old level. So I'm going to be monitoring and looking at appropriate age material, right? And that may be different there. So there's that nuance of developmental age and chronological age. That's the amount of time that's lapsed since birth. That's how old we are, kind of looking at the dates on the calendar. So for example, kindergarten, most are starting, they're in kindergarten, you're 5, 6. You're starting when you're 5, you're turning 6 somewhere in that year, kind of thing. So that's that difference. Any questions or thoughts on those? That was just outlined. Like I said, that wasn't the one that was.
Right.
So then we talked about appropriate material, free of, and this is where I've expanded based on our free of excessive obscene language, sexual content, graphic violence. And then I'm starting to unpack each of the 3, okay? So excessive use of obscene language includes language that's deemed derogatory or obscene. For example, racial or sexist slurs are offensive. Profanity would be considered obscene. The issue is around excessive, right? I don't define the word excessive. Do we need to? Do we need to, you know, like, I don't know where that bar would lie. Because there certainly could be books with a one-off, there's certainly, you know, but what does that mean? And maybe we just look through a couple texts and bring them back. Because once we put this in play, we would have to review everything under that umbrella now, right? And maybe that's what we do is we bring some examples. It's mostly in the middle grades, and we bring some examples of kind of what print might look like. And maybe I cultivate a couple of those, have you read them, and then that helps. Like, where is that bar for excessive?
Yeah.
I think that's the only way, you know, when you read it, you might feel it, and that could be different for anyone.
Is there a number of how many swears?
Right,
Yeah.
but that's just it, and that could be different for anyone. So I think, you know, and maybe it's not that, maybe it's some of these other pieces in conjunction with it, right? It's riddled with X, Y, and Z, and so I don't know where that bar would be. I don't have an answer for that. That is something that we're talking about across teams right now. But I think we at least know what that language is, what it looks like, and what the expectation is there.
Right.
Okay. Sexual content, I put sexual content includes explicit detailed descriptions of sex acts of any kind.
Yeah.
So I don't think I needed to further define
Yeah.
anything like that. I think
Right.
we all know what that means, consensual, non-consensual, like anything
Yeah.
around that. And then graphic violence includes the depiction or representation of vivid, brutal, or realistic acts of violence. And I put, for example, decapitation, dismemberment, mutilation, maiming, disfiguration in that. Now, my one piece, having taught, ancient history in middle school myself, like, okay, we talk about ancient, like, okay, what does it mean to be drawn and quarter? They did that back then, all of those. So, while the textbooks don't get into, I don't think that they get into a graphic description of that.
Right.
Those things are so stated in some pieces. So does this get at that, do we think, or do I need to add maybe explicit detail in addition to that?
Yeah, maybe it's more like the detailed description of it versus just stating that it happened. Like in a textbook, obviously you're gonna come across things like that.
And I think for us, as we kind of move through and try and do this, I'm thankful that it's summer, but as we move through this piece, maybe a couple sample that would give you those pieces so you can see, okay, what does that look like if I'm describing,
Right, I think in context means so much.
Right.
If you were talking about a fiction book versus a nonfiction that they're using to describe a historical act.
Yeah, and I don't think we, like I said, we work with it, but I don't want it written in a manner where people could perceive. So I think,
Right.
like I said, and the other one, maybe pulling a couple samples and going, that's where the bar is for
Yeah.
us. Here that is. So we'll work on that and get it to the committee and our general board around those pieces and go, okay, where is that bar? Because then we can do that restriction by level. What's appropriate and what's appropriate for our choice versus, again, being really tight on what kids are exposed to through those primary resources.
Agreed.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions about that? That's kind of what we were trying to get at and define and kind of draw a line on. And again, I'll fix those pieces around detailed description. But any questions from the committee or?
I just want to point out, and I think you guys have reiterated that there is somewhat of a difference between choice materials and primary instructional materials. The other thing is, I look a lot, so I've gone through numbers of book lists and looked at book titles and read books and all that, and there's a set of books called dystopian titles, and The Hunger Games, for example, falls into that category. And I think at some point it might be good to look at like a series like that too, because if you look at a series like that, it's very popular with kids, but there's going to be swearing, there's going to be some graphic violence in there, you know what I mean? But then we're talking about what age level is it appropriate, what age level is it not, and just looking at all those different dynamics that feed into it. I think is really important.
As we talked in framing this, making sure that a book like that isn't a primary resource.
Right.
That, like you said, it's a selection. And we've gone through those checks and balances around authorization from families and those pieces. Kind of to that point, Tim and I have talked about our systems. I'll segue off this for just a second. We use a library system called the Destiny system. We'll get at that a little bit, but we were also in our prior conversations talking about the difference. You talked about, we've looked at a ton of resources around how do you vet books and who gets to be in charge of that. And there's a ton. So we were looking through today and said, okay, while we don't have to back a certain one, what we can do is make all these tools available to families and say, here are some options for you. We're going to provide you this base information and what we see so that you can make that selection. But if you want to dig further, here's a couple options. And then as they look at it and go, you know what, this aligns with how we feel as a family and all that, this is getting me what I need. So that we're informing families and giving them the opportunity to go a little bit deeper. But we certainly will take on that burden of writing out those descriptions in addition to the book titles, so that as families are authorizing those supplementary pieces. They've got what they need in front of them and a couple tools to dig deeper. Tim, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think some of this comes from the idea of with 361.1 AR, we need to, as Jill and I updated that this year, we want to put public front and center, kind of that review process. So that will be another tab under, I believe it's the district area of the website that talks about the process. So I don't have to dig down to the board policy page. It'll also track all of the books or resources that are brought up for review. So you can see that. So that was part of that transparency piece Jill and I wanted to kind of put into this, being able to make that forward center. And then we'll talk a little bit later about the library pieces and all that, but also putting some of those pieces accessible on the district page and making sure people know how to access them at that point.
So again, if you think of anything after, but I think we got at kind of those core ideas with those primary resources, and then we'll get some reading to help us set or further define, like I said, excessive or those pieces, and we can even, you know, have samples there of what this means, right, in action for people, so then they can, okay, I can read that part and know what it means. So we have also course selections. Students are provided with opportunities to select specific courses of study. We will make sure to include an overview of the content as well as any resource that would be used. Families review, approve, or deny their child's course requests. So anytime that they're signing up for which language they want to take, which music they want to take, which electives they want to take starting middle school or high school, there's ownership to that piece too. And so, like I said, if there's something in there that's they don't want to pursue, they would have that information that they need to have that discussion as a family. And you know, there's plenty of courses in the course catalog for our kids to explore. So I think that got at kind of that high school course selection piece. And then there's individual book selections for instruction. So this is tripping into the book clubs and all of that. So students are sometimes provided with choice regarding book selection for the purpose of instruction. So it's not just what I picked out of the library for fun reading, it's an instructional piece, right? So often called book clubs, this is a time when students participate in shared reading discussion regarding a selected title. The book choices will be shared with families prior to use, will include a general description of the book as well as required signature to authorize student selections. So again, we've expanded on a little bit more around those titles, beyond just the titles, what that would be. And then as soon as we get that website up and running, it will always be there. So families can scout it the summer before, they can scout it a year ahead, they could scout it then, but we'll also do a direct notification of those families prior to the units that they would participate in. And again, unique to us is that parent authorization for those pieces.
So would, it looks like maybe how we discussed, like the appropriate material should be for excessive seen language, blah, blah, blah. Would that only be for the primary resources and not for like individual book clubs?
You would have a little bit wider so that families could make a choice. So certainly not, you know, you're not going to be putting high school titles in front of middle school kids. So we'll go through those lists, existing lists with that lens. And like I said, we talked a little bit last time around making sure those lists were not filled with half the titles in that there was more expansion, but that was maybe just a couple titles that fell into that category. So we'll review it with that lens, but there may be a little bit wider opportunity there, but not like, oh great, this is when I get to pick these things. That's not how it functioned. Yeah. And I think that's us re-looking at those and re-presenting them to the committee to look at again, and then we can go through those as well.
The books from the book club?
Yeah, we can go through those lists. When we roll over and update that website and those pieces, it'll be a nice time for us to go back and just go through all those pieces.
Yeah, I'd like to see the list.
Yep.
I've only seen.
Yeah, you only see
that
right,
kinda
yeah.
showed up on,
Exactly. So
somewhere.
that'll actually be part of that, and you'll have all those right in there. And so when we kind of go through that, I think we will probably take some time to go through the different components and then bring back for discussion and get in after these.
Okay.
So, yeah. All right, then you can have classroom libraries, right? There's bookshelves and all of that. So we're trying to get at every nuance of where kids are running into books. So classroom libraries are small, cultivated collections of materials housed in a classroom environment and provide immediate access to leveled materials for student reading. Does leveled materials, do I need to say add a student's reading level? Because you're gonna have like a couple of year grade levels there to meet kids' needs, so do I need to say like reading level there? I wasn't sure about that language.
It'd probably be more clear, yes.
Okay. Yeah, when I sounded like that felt a little jargon to me. So families should contact their child's classroom teachers to ensure classroom library book selections meet expectations of the family. So we have some core lists of books that go into classrooms, those kind of things, but those libraries have been built into collections over years and years and years. So, and we could even mock up something so it helps families, but we were talking about, you know what, I should be able to pick up and, you know, talk to Mr. Harder and go, you know what, as a family, we prefer to not have our child read these particular topics, you know, and a teacher can help monitor that right in the classroom. Kids shop for books and then go through those. It's a really easy thing, and kids are coached. You know, I'm talking about little kids. There's not a lot of this in there, but we wanted to make sure and touch on any time we're seeing book selection. But it's really easy and not a spotlight on kids. It's a private conversation between the teacher and the family. Because you're always coaching kids on picking just right books. And it might be level, it might be all that, like, oh, you know what, I think you'd be super interested in this, you were just talking about this, like, people are very adept at that.
I had a similar experience with my my first grader. They were getting to choose some books at the end of the year, probably from the classroom libraries I'm guessing they were getting rid of, and they just sent it out. I'm like, please help them choose books that don't have these following topics.
Right, exactly.
And it was fine.
Yeah, and they'll navigate that, you know, they've got a class and they're certainly respectful of that and can help do that, and they may or may not even be present in that classroom library, but it just helps you to have that assurance as a family that we're working with you on that. And then there's individual book selections for personal use, right? That's getting at that library media center collection. And parents can ask their child to log in or use their child's login credentials to access the library's online resource database, that's Destiny, to view any book in the collection, as well as their child's currently checked out books. And if families would like to restrict access for their child, you don't do it online, you just contact the library media center specialist and again express your wishes so that they can help monitor. Any kind of checkout has to pass through them. And they can be, again, just as
note on there.
Exactly. And they're, you know, they know all the kids, but you know, our elementaries are they know all the kids that are coming through. So again, they can just help coach guide. The classroom teachers would be aware. They're mostly going as part of their English language arts class, that kind of thing. So we can do that as well. Families and community members could also view the library's online resource database without a login to view any materials that are available in our school libraries. And Tim and I talked about that, making sure people know where that is and adding a little video of how to do that, how to check that out if you're a parent or just a community member, how you can see that piece. So I think we got at kind of where we were in conversation last time. Would you like me to incorporate these concepts? Certainly, like I said, there's a couple little nuances and maybe we need to get at how we would deem excessive, but would you like these incorporated into the policy language itself?
I think so, because I think the administrative rule doesn't necessarily come before the board and could be changed at any time. So I think I would like to see.
You can also put this in. You know, if there's components in here that really flesh out that idea for you, the only thing that I would write, it's lengthy, but I would try and, so you see when you get into these next pages, it looks like really long lists and you lose which site of part you're on kind of thing. What I would do is I'd be really in attention to format. I'd chunk it to certain areas, so I'd maybe take, you know, the pieces of, get the definitions right with, and then what the process is, and try and put it together visually. So if you'd like me to put the concepts in the AR, plus kind of what we've talked about tonight, and look at it policy mock-up, and try and format it so people could go to the parts they need, I could do that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Any other pieces that you want me to expand on, or, like I said, I'll mock it up then, next like that, and I think that'll be a good visual, and then we'll try and pull some of those pieces, and if any district around us comes up with, you know, anything worthy, I'll make sure. Yeah, and like I said, we're really kind of working together on that.
It's a challenging topic, and a lot of districts are navigating it right now as well. And
It is, you know, and I'm okay with being a front runner and getting something done, and also working collaboratively with other districts as we all look through it. I think everyone wants that to happen in a positive manner for kids, families, and communities. And then, again, I just had the exhibit piece there. So, and that would sit right behind that, and it would be its own link, and then Tim will convert it so that they can do it as a fillable form or printable, or you don't even need the form. If you just have to have something that includes that information. So we'll make that clear.
so, obviously, after this would, you know, be placed onto the policy, there would probably be some books that would be in violation. So how would we go about evaluating all that, or would?
We would probably put a game plan and a timeline around how we would review and which pieces. Yep, I'd go after all the primary resource material immediately, and look at how exhaustive that list is, what that expectation is, and try and get that. I would like to get that cleared before the doors open in fall, but we may at least have to hit first semester or things like that, first, and have to chunk it. Just to make sure it's done right, that kind of thing. So we'll look at that, kind of cross-examine it.
Okay,
I will mock this up and bring that forward. The next paperclip set is 362. This is not labeled correctly. 362 is a different policy entirely, and I've put right behind it. This is where the concepts would go. 361.2 is the actual title, and it would be around library media center material selection and reconsideration. So reconsideration would be doubly stated in the curriculum material selection as well as the library selection. So there wouldn't be any confusion. I've taken all of these bullets, so they're numbered here, but I made them the leading bullets in that very first part. And then Tim and I went through and gave more depth, accountability, and updated language around library media center selection.
It looks like number 6 has part of the sentence cut off. It looks like only half of the sentence.
Number 6 is what's currently in place. So take a look at the white. Yep. So take a look at the white. I've taken the actual bullets. I'll make sure that we've got that real piece added in. So we'll add that.
Okay.
I'm making a little star on mine right now.
I'm just curious if any language from common school funds comes into this, or do we leave that separate?
So Jill, in that case, it's already incorporated in the piece from WSAB. So Common School Funds for the committee is a state funded program out of a revenue piece that is purely and only used for library services. And so that is how we fund our libraries here, not our staffing, but all of our materials and our technology for our libraries are funded through that. The district does not use it sits in Fund 10, but we don't use other funds to purchase library books. It's specific for that. And so we have to meet some certain requirements around that. You'll see in the new 362 that Jen will bring forward in just a moment, we have to have a certified library staff member. We have to have a librarian, or you have to contract that service, or you can get no funding at that point in time in the state of Wisconsin. That's written into law. And so there are some things in there that talk about breadth of materials, and that's why you see those first bullet points. The only thing Jen and I did take out of the old policy to the new one is it still references the 21st century, or for the 21st century. We've been in the 21st century for a while, so we thought we could take that out. It's maybe a Tim pet peeve thing also at that point. But it really gets to the idea that we're meeting the guidance under state law around libraries and access to material. And the fact that libraries are different than the instructional material.
So the remainder of that bullet, to place principle above personal opinion and reason about prejudice in the selection of materials of the highest quality in order to assure a comprehensive collection appropriate for the users of the library is the remainder of that bullet, just so you have it. Any questions, comments around that initially?
I know that there are some books that maybe do require like a parental permission or like a certain age group to check them out, right?
So we have, so there's a nuance between the collections, your middle, high school, et cetera, and then the system, there's some technology pieces in play that would restrict access, so kids can't do an interlibrary loan or request a collection that's, I can't be a little kid and grab a high school book. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, so basically we have an
There's
interloan
restrictions there.
library policy that allows you to request from other sites. With now having ebooks, we have something similar in play with our ebook provider of what access they have by level at that point in time. Our biggest struggle when you talk about age ranges is our unique setup of 5, 6, and 7, 8. Most systems being 6, 7, and 8. So our 5, 6 building is geared more towards elementaries than you might see in a typical what a 6th grader would have access to at that point in time. So our students don't see the real middle school collection until they get to 7th grade at that point in time.
So to your point, we have kind of restrictions in place on the collection in some format already. There's no other questions, then this is, the next one is the Real 362, which is Library Media Services. And this is all new language. It's from the WASB template language that's provided. And Tim, who oversees library media, as we looked at it, we wanted to hit all aspects of, books, access those pieces. So therefore, just adding this as a standalone policy around that. So take a look at that piece. Again, the highlights are around, having a plan, and then looking at the pieces and making sure you're cultivating a collection and that it's not a stagnant collection and that can change over time, and keeping that.
The board will actually see we're going to combine our technology plan with our library media service plan. There's a lot of overlap and many districts are doing that now. I think many people would be surprised the number of books we bring into the system a year, but we're a large system with 5 elementary schools, an intermediate, a middle, and a large high school campus. But there's also a lot of weeding that goes through that and collection development, and also equity and access for our kids so that we don't have different access at Green Tree Elementary than Decorah and Jackson and so forth. And so Kim, who's our library media coordinator, does a phenomenal job of trying to balance those pieces out. And then regularly looking, you'll see in there things around databases and access and making sure, we're buying the things that kids are using and promoting those and using them both in the classroom and for research at that point in time. So you'll see that embedded this spring when that whole process comes forward for a full board approval at that point.
So this is kind of laying into policy that accountability piece, that a plan will exist. You should be able to put your hands on it and it'll come before the board. Any questions around that? Okay. That takes us to the last one around controversial issues. We, in our discussion last time, didn't have any recommendations for that policy. Just looking at that same piece, there's some other services that talk about or might incorporate some of those pieces. I think we've got it laid out pretty well in policy, but I was just looking at the AR hasn't been updated in quite a while. Do we want to spend our time reviewing that? Are there components, as we said before, that maybe should be pushed into policy around that? Do we want anything? What we stay away from is cross-referencing one policy to another. Because if one gets touched, you may or may not clean up this. So does this in its entirety say what we need it to say? Again, last time we were focused on getting the detail into the selection on the outset, and making sure our parents have, they have the final word on anything. Whether it's a lesson that a child's learning, that's a book that they're selecting, all of those pieces, and we would want to position ourselves to respect that. But take a look at the AR. Again, it has not been revisited in quite a while, and is it something you'd like us to take a look and just make sure it's updated, it's good to go, or do you want me to push that into the policy itself in some way?
I think I don't have a strong opinion on that right now, but I can always.
Yeah, yep, reach out, take some time, take a look at it. One thing we've talked about as superintendents, and you can consider, we don't use the language in our current policy. I think ours was largely probably developed, we do a lot of just local policy, but I am seeing just sensitivity of kind of what the communities are calling for, language that, and I'm seeing the exact same, it does not tend to indoctrinate or persuade students to a certain point of view in that. Also encourages open-mindedness, or that the work is conducted in the spirit of scholarly inquiry, that something is connected back to the learning piece.
Sure.
Or making sure it doesn't cause substantial disruption in the school environment. So we've been talking about and thinking about those pieces and what that looks like. If you'd like me to look at playing at incorporating some of those concepts, where they fit with our language, where it's the same, or maybe where we could call that out.
Yeah.
I think that's things that I've heard expressed, as we've had conversation.
Yeah.
So I think I could incorporate those and use a little bit more of that language.
Sure.
In there. So I'll take a stab at that piece. Any other pieces, comments?
Glad to see us moving forward,
Yeah. Yeah, and looking at it, I think it really, like you said, is being responsive and meeting all the needs. And then again, something unique to us is that parent consent piece on those. So I'll take a look at the book list, map out kind of timelines, all of those. We'll pull a couple things that as we think about reading, connect with some teachers, to give us some titles that you might want to look into to help us kind of set that bar around excessive, or even just some samples. For families to look at and think, and then Tim will put together that list for you to kind of play around with different sites that would help families to select what's best for their child or children. We'll get those pieces
Yeah,
for
I
your
like the
review.
idea of providing that too, because a lot of parents maybe don't know where to go to get that information.
Yeah,
And
and
Amazon review is gonna.
yeah, and that was one of the biggest things I think that as superintendents people were struggling with, because no one entity, they're connected with either political things or other things, and it's like, you know what, you can't, there isn't just one that'll do it. But I'm okay with saying these are common sites where we don't support, but we want to just make sure that and can find those things beyond, as you said, a review.
Well,
and
when
it's
you're on some sites and not on others, and.
exactly, yeah. And we were playing around with some of them and looking, and it's like you can isolate to age ranges, topic. You can filter nicely on some of the sites by what fits for you and your family. So we'll make sure that education's a piece of it.
Yes.
Thank you. It's not easy. It's hard to dig into. I appreciate everyone's kind of thoughtfulness on this. as we continue to move this forward, what I'll do is, if you've got anything from committee, please reach out to me. What I'll do is reach out to me individually, because we like to do all our work publicly. So if there's anything, then I can push that back out at policy, like, okay, after our discussion, we had these pieces. You'll speak to an update for the board at our next board meeting. I've got a spot in there for you to update the board. This will be a part of that. And then we pick up with another policy meeting at the end of the month. And so we'll get this right in there as a recommendation from the committee. But I'll get these pieces in front of you, what we've talked about tonight, so you can see them in revision format.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, if there are no further questions, we will move on to our next discussion item, which is the curriculum committee calendar for the 2023-2024 school year.
Thank you. So you should have a handout that has suggested dates. I see that June noticed one thing on the top that we need to adjust, and so I just want to make sure that the 4:30 time is okay for the committee and that we can move ahead with that time.
It is.
Okay. So they'd be 4:30 to 6-ish. I mean, we tend to say we're going to end at 6, but we're going to probably be just a couple minutes over tonight, so that's okay. And then if you look at the list for consideration, I went through and looked at all the dates that potentially are going to overlap with a board meeting. And what I mean by overlap is you might have a board meeting one night and a curriculum committee meeting the next night. So it'd be 2 nights in a row. So there's several of those. Are you guys okay having 2 meetings like that in a week? That's my first question.
I'm fine.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
okay.
Okay. So then, are there any dates for consideration that anybody has a challenge with?
No.
Okay, so then the dates are okay as they're listed on the paper?
Mhm.
Okay. Then we will go with those dates and we will change the time to 4:30.
Perfect.
Okay?
Sounds good.
So we will send out an agenda, and I'm assuming we can probably have that put on the website too. I see the board meeting dates are on the website, so we'll put curriculum committee on there too. Okay? All right, thank you.
Okay. It looks like we got through our entire agenda here, so we will go ahead. If there's no further questions or comments, then we'll close the meeting at 6 o'clock. All right, thank you.